My daughter-in-law had carefully cropped me out of the digital holiday photo, a stark white line where my arm once rested on my son's shoulder, a ghost limb against his festive sweater. I saw it on her social media feed first, the smiling faces of my son, his wife, and my 2 grandchildren, framed perfectly for a greeting that excluded me entirely. We were all supposed to be together that afternoon, a forced cheer in their newly remodeled living room in Naperville, Illinois, just west of Chicago. If any part of this feels familiar to you, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. The air in their house that day had been thin, stretched taut with unspoken resentments. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, had directed the photo session with military precision, positioning bodies, adjusting smiles. I remembered standing near the back, my hand gently on Robert's sleeve, a familiar gesture of maternal pride. He hadn't flinched. Not then. I remember the click of the camera, the flash that briefly blinded me. I thought nothing of it, just another family snapshot. It was only later, sitting alone in my own quiet house back in Wheaton, that the true image developed in my mind. The perfect family unit, -1. Me. It wasn't an oversight. It was too clean, too precise. A digital excision, clinical and deliberate. The weight of it settled in my chest, heavy and cold. My grandchildren, Liam and Clara, looked so happy, their faces bright and unburdened by the subtle cruelties of their parents. They were innocent witnesses to a slow, quiet, disappearing act. I traced the empty space on the screen with my finger, feeling the phantom ache of my absence. My son had to have seen it. He would have approved it. That thought, more than the cropping itself, was the blade. It wasn't just Sarah. It was Robert too. A shared decision to erase me from the narrative of their holiday joy. The feeling was not shock, but a grim confirmation of a pattern that had been steadily tightening its grip over the past 2 years. Their holiday planning had always felt like a minefield. Each year, new rules, new unspoken expectations. Last Thanksgiving, I arrived early, as requested, to help set the table, only to find it already laden with plates and cutlery, a deliberate barrier to my participation. Sarah had smiled, a cool, polite mask, and said, "Oh, Mom, you're so sweet, but we had it all under control." I remembered the scent of sage and roasting turkey, the warmth from the kitchen, all of it feeling like a wall between me and the family I'd once nurtured. Robert had been in the living room, absorbed in a football game, not even glancing up. He hadn't intervened. He never did. It was a subtle, insidious disengagement, a slow draining of my value. I'd come to anticipate these small rejections, bracing myself against the quiet sting of them. The card, though, was different. It wasn't a gesture in person, easily dismissed as an oversight. It was a public declaration, a carefully curated image sent out to friends, colleagues, and distant relatives. A statement. It made my breath catch, a dry, rasping sound in my own throat. The photograph was not just a picture. It was evidence. I walked through my own home, the familiar quiet pressing in. My fingers brushed against the photo album on the shelf, the one filled with faded pictures of Robert as a boy, a mischievous grin, his arm wrapped around my waist. The memory was a comfort and a torment. He had been so different then, so quick to laugh, so quick to hug. Where had that boy gone? Had I lost him? Or had he simply outgrown me, shed me like an unwanted skin? The thought was unbearable. I poured myself a glass of water, the ice clinking against the rim, a small, sharp noise in the stillness. I sat at my kitchen table, the one I'd bought with Robert's father, the wood still smooth beneath my hand. The weight of the moment felt immense, disproportionate to a simple holiday card, yet entirely accurate. It was the culmination of countless small slights, accumulation of being overlooked, unconsulted, and ultimately unloved. The digital image flickered in my mind, the stark white line, a perfect incision. It was a wound, not just to my pride, but to my very sense of belonging. My own son had allowed this. I found myself meticulously going through my phone, searching for the original image, hoping for a mistake. But no, the digital trace of me was gone. It was a clean erase. My mind replayed the day in their Naperville home. The stage smiles, the way Sarah had subtly positioned herself between me and Robert. Her arm a gentle, almost imperceptible barrier. I remembered Liam, my grandson, pulling at my skirt asking me to read him a story. And Sarah's quick, sharp intervention. Liam, Grandma's busy. Go play with your trains. I hadn't been busy. I had been waiting, always waiting for a moment of connection. These small moments, insignificant on their own, now formed a constellation of purposeful exclusion. The card was merely the brightest, most visible star in that bleak sky. It was a public announcement of my private diminishment. My hands trembled slightly as I put my phone down. The house felt suddenly cold, despite the warmth of the early December afternoon sun streaming through the windows. The silence amplified the hollow ache in my chest. What had I done to deserve this? Or perhaps what had I failed to do? The questions circled, relentless and without answer. I had tried, in my own way, to bridge the growing gap. I'd offered to babysit more often, to bring over home-cooked meals, to help with school projects. Each offer was met with a polite, often dismissive refusal. "We've got it covered, Mom," Robert would say, his voice flat, devoid of the warmth I remembered. Sarah's emails were always professional, concise, detailing schedules and requirements for the grandchildren, but never inviting intimacy. It felt like a transaction, not a relationship. The more I reached out, the more they seemed to pull away, constructing an invisible wall brick by brick. It was the casual indifference that hurt the most. Not anger, but a profound lack of consideration, as if I were a distant acquaintance rather than the woman who had raised Robert. I watched their lives unfold from a distance, glimpses on social media, never quite invited inside. The holiday card was the final, undeniable proof that the distance was not accidental. It was by design. The air grew heavier, thick with unspoken words and ignored efforts. I sat there, the weight of the rejection a tangible pressure, a silent witness to my own erasure. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear, a conversation with my sister, Eleanor, last summer. We were sitting on my porch swing in Wheaton, sipping iced tea, watching the fireflies begin to dot the twilight sky. I had spoken of my vague unease, the feeling of being pushed to the periphery of Robert's life. Eleanor had listened, her face unreadable, then said, "Sometimes people make choices you can't understand, Anne, choices that have nothing to do with your worth." Her words had been a comfort then, a gentle reassurance. Now they felt like a prophecy. The holiday card was the stark manifestation of those choices. It wasn't about worth, it was about power, and they had seized it, leaving me with nothing but the dust of what used to be. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across my living room floor, mirroring the lengthening shadows in my own life. I felt a tightening in my throat, a dry, aching knot that wouldn't yield. This wasn't just a picture, it was a statement that had finally, painfully made its way from their private actions to a public declaration. The next few days were a blur of muted colors and internal quiet. I went through the motions, grocery shopping, watering plants, but my mind was constantly returning to the image, the jagged edge of my absence. It was a raw wound that wouldn't close. I avoided answering calls, particularly from my sister, not ready to articulate the depth of this new betrayal. The silence in my home became a heavy blanket, muffling any joy or hope. I found myself staring out the window, watching the suburban life of Wheaton unfold. Children riding bikes, neighbors walking dogs, the comforting rhythm of everyday existence. But I felt disconnected, a silent observer rather than a participant. The world outside seemed vibrant, while my own internal landscape felt barren. Each passing hour deepened the realization that this was not a misunderstanding. This was intentional. A quiet, calculated removal. And the hardest part was acknowledging that Robert, my son, was complicit. He had allowed his mother to be cropped out of their family portrait, not just literally but metaphorically. It was a cold, hard truth, stripped bare of any comforting illusions. I stopped making plans for the holidays. The usual inquiries about Christmas dinner, about gifts for the grandchildren, all felt hollow, pointless. The thought of stepping into their home, into that carefully constructed facade of familial harmony, felt like entering a cage. I imagined their perfect tree, their perfect presents, and their perfect family, all arranged without a place for me. The idea of witnessing that manufactured joy, knowing I was deliberately excluded, was too much. I had always prided myself on my resilience, my ability to navigate life's challenges with quiet dignity. But this was different. This wasn't a challenge. It was a fundamental rejection. My stomach ached with a persistent, low-grade nausea. Sleep offered little escape. My dreams filled with distorted images. Always the cropped photograph. Always the missing piece. The weight of it pressed down. A constant, dull ache in my chest. I felt like a discarded garment, folded neatly and placed in a forgotten drawer. There was no rage, just a profound, quiet emptiness, a desolation that seeped into every corner of my being. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this pattern of exclusion was not new. It had started subtly, years ago, when Sarah first entered Robert's life. Small things. My advice on parenting techniques dismissed with a saccharine smile. My traditional holiday recipes replaced without consultation. My suggestions for family outings subtly undermined. I recalled an Easter picnic 2 years ago at Cantigny Park in Wheaton, where I had packed a special basket of my homemade deviled eggs, a family favorite. Sarah had brought store-bought quiches and insisted everyone eat those first. My eggs left untouched in their covered dish. Robert had said nothing, his eyes fixed on Sarah, a silent agreement in his gaze. It had been a slow erosion, a chipping away at my role, my identity within the family. Each small slight had accumulated, forming a foundation of quiet resentment and an unsettling sense of irrelevance. The holiday card was not an anomaly. It was the inevitable climax of a long, deliberate campaign to diminish me. The realization was stark, a brutal clarity that left me breathless. The decision formed slowly, not in a burst of anger, but in a cold, quiet resolve. I sat at my kitchen table, tracing the wood grain, and looked at the empty space where a family photo used to be. The cropped image haunted me, but also ignited something. Not defiance, not yet, but a deep primal need to assert my existence, to reclaim my place, not within their manufactured narrative, but within my own. The thought, initially a whisper, grew louder. I am still here. I am their grandmother. My grandchildren, Liam and Clara, were the core of it. They were innocent, pure. They deserved to know their grandmother was present, valued, and connected to them. The idea of my own holiday card, with just me and them, began to take root. It wasn't about revenge, not truly. It was about truth, about asserting a reality that they had tried to deny. It was a quiet act of self-preservation, a reclaiming of dignity. The nausea in my stomach lessened, replaced by a firm, unwavering resolve. The empty space on that digital card would not define me. I would define myself. The first step was to secure time with Liam and Clara. Sarah had become increasingly restrictive with access, citing busy schedules, school, extracurricular activities. I knew I couldn't ask Robert. His response would be Sarah's echo. I called my sister, Eleanor. I need your help, I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the internal turmoil. I explained the situation with the card, the full extent of the deliberate exclusion. Eleanor listened, her silence a comforting presence on the other end of the line. When I finished, she simply said, "This is unacceptable, Anne. What do you need?" I told her I needed to see Liam and Clara, alone, without their parents' interference. Eleanor had connections through her volunteer work at the local community center in Downers Grove. She offered to arrange a Grandparents' Day event, something seemingly innocuous, that would allow me to take photos with the children without raising suspicion. It was a subtle maneuvering, a quiet subversion of Sarah's control. The plan was not to confront, but to simply exist, visibly, with my grandchildren. The day Eleanor arranged came quickly. It was a Saturday morning, crisp and cold, but clear. The community center was bustling with other grandparents and their energetic charges. Sarah dropped off Liam and Clara, looking harried and barely made eye contact with me. "Just for an hour, Mom," she said, her voice tight, already looking at her watch. "Robert has a golf game, and I have errands." She left before I could respond. It was the window I needed. Liam and Clara, oblivious to the undercurrents, rushed into my arms, their small bodies warm and full of life. We played games, read books, and then, subtly, I guided them toward the makeshift photo booth Eleanor had set up with a friend. I held them close, one on each side, their heads resting against my shoulders. The photographer, a kind woman Eleanor knew, snapped several shots. I made sure to capture their genuine smiles, their innocent affection. This was the truth of our connection, not the curated lie of Sarah's card. The photos were pure, unburdened by resentment or calculation. They were simply us. Later that week, I went to a local print shop in Lombard, a small, independent place I'd used for years. I selected the best photo, one where Liam was looking up at me with adoration, and Clara had her arms wrapped tightly around my waist, her face buried in my side, a picture of pure, unadulterated grandmotherly love. I chose a simple, elegant design for the card. No elaborate borders, no glitter. Just the clear, vibrant image and a short, heartfelt message, wishing you a season of warmth and joy. With love, Anne, Liam, and Clara. I deliberately omitted Robert and Sarah. This card wasn't about them. It was about the direct, undeniable bond I shared with my grandchildren. The woman at the print shop, Mrs. Jenkins, a kind older woman with silver hair, looked at the photo and smiled. "They're beautiful children, Anne," she said. Her simple words of affirmation were a balm, a quiet validation, in a world that had tried to make me invisible. The act of placing the order, of choosing the paper, of writing the message, felt like drawing a breath after years of holding it. The cards arrived a week later, crisp and heavy in their box. I took one out, turning it over in my hands. The paper was smooth, the image clear and vibrant. It was tangible proof of my existence, of my enduring connection to my grandchildren. I carefully compiled a list of recipients. My sister, Eleanor, of course, my extended family, longtime friends, even some of Robert's distant relatives who had always shown me kindness. I excluded Robert and Sarah from the mailing list entirely. They would receive their own different kind of message. This wasn't about directly shaming them, but about quietly asserting my reality. It was a subtle act of rebellion, a private declaration of my continued relevance. I bought a roll of festive stamps and sat at my dining room table, addressing each envelope by hand, the familiar rhythm of the pen, a comforting meditation. Each card represented a small piece of my reclaimed self, a quiet whisper of defiance against the digital erasure. The act of sending them felt less like a hostile act, and more like a necessary act of survival. The first hint of the ripple effect came from Eleanor. Her call was brief, her voice carefully neutral. "Anne, your card arrived. It's lovely." A few people have already mentioned it. She didn't elaborate, but I knew what she meant. The contrast. The missing parents. The message was implicit, but clear. Then came a text from Robert's aunt, Martha, who lived in Scottsdale, Arizona, a woman who had always been fond of me. "Anne, your card with Liam and Clara is just precious. It's so good to see them. Hope you're doing well." Again, the lack of mention of Robert or Sarah was telling they knew. They understood the silence. The cards were reaching their intended audience, quietly laying bare the fractured family dynamic. I felt a mix of trepidation and grim satisfaction. This was not a loud battle, but a subtle shifting of perception, a quiet recentering of my narrative. It was not malicious, but factual. The truth, delivered through a simple holiday greeting, had a powerful resonance. The silence from Robert and Sarah, however, was deafening. A week passed, and then another. No phone call from Robert, no angry text from Sarah. Just the continued, heavy silence. It confirmed my belief. They were aware of the cards, aware of the statement I had made. Their non-response was a response in itself, a refusal to acknowledge my act of self-assertion. It underscored the passive-aggressive nature of their control. I imagined Sarah stewing, perhaps even tearing up her own meticulously crafted card in private. Robert, I pictured, would simply avoid the topic, as he always did, his face a mask of polite indifference. But the cards were out there, in the mailboxes of family and friends, a quiet counter-narrative to their perfect image. My resolve hardened. This was not a fight I sought, but it was a fight I was willing to wage, on my own terms. The quiet power of my action was far more potent than any shouted argument. I felt a subtle shift within myself, a shedding of the years of quiet resentment and the suffocating feeling of invisibility. I was no longer waiting to be seen. I was actively making myself visible. Then came the call from my son, 3 days before Christmas. His voice was strained, laced with a barely concealed anger. What was the meaning of that card?" he demanded. No preamble, no pleasantries. "Sarah is upset. Why would you send something like that, excluding us?" His tone was accusatory, as if I had committed a grave offense. I took a deep breath, the familiar weight of their expectations pressing in. But this time I didn't crumble. "Robert," I said, my voice steady. It was a holiday card featuring me and my grandchildren. "I thought it was quite clear." His voice rose. "But you left us out. Everyone is asking questions." "Are they?" I replied, my voice neutral, almost clinical. "Perhaps they're asking why your own card left me out first." That was the original statement, wasn't it? The line went silent. He hadn't expected the directness. The mirror held up to their own actions. The power dynamics were beginning to shift. Subtly, imperceptibly, the silence on the line stretched, thick with unspoken accusations and dawning realization. Robert stammered. "That was a mistake, a digital error." I knew it wasn't. Was it, Robert? Because it felt rather deliberate. A clean cut. A clear message. My voice remained calm, devoid of the hurt and anger I had carried for so long. This was not an emotional outburst. It was a simple statement of fact. "My card," I continued, "was also a clear message. A truth that I exist, that I am their grandmother, and that our connection is real, regardless of what photos are cropped or omitted." He huffed, a sound of frustration. "This is just unnecessary drama, Mom. It's Christmas." "Is it, Robert?" I asked. "Or is it simply a consequence?"
You made a choice. I made one too.
"The difference is mine was based on a truth you tried to erase." He didn't respond, the weight of his own actions pressing down on him. The conversation ended shortly after, without resolution, but with a palpable shift in the air. For the first time in years, I had held my ground, not with shouting, but with quiet, unyielding fact. The weeks that followed were not a sudden reconciliation, but a subtle rebalancing. Robert began to call more frequently, though still with a careful distance. His calls were less about obligation, more about tentative steps towards something resembling engagement. He didn't mention the card again, but the unspoken knowledge of it hung between us, a silent acknowledgement that the rules had changed. I began to set new boundaries, gently but firmly. When Sarah suggested a family dinner and dictated a specific time that was inconvenient for me, I politely declined, offering an alternative. In the past, I would have reshuffled my schedule to accommodate them. Now I asserted my own needs. It was a slow, quiet reclaiming of my personal space and time, a recognition that my life had value beyond their demands. I felt a quiet strength unfurl within me, a sense of self-possession I hadn't realized I'd lost. I took to meeting Liam and Clara at their school in Plainfield, Illinois. Sometimes just for a quick hello, sometimes for a walk to the park if Sarah wasn't there to whisk them away. These small, unscripted moments were precious, untainted by the careful orchestrations of their parents. Liam would run to me, his backpack bouncing, and Clara would cling to my hand, her small fingers warm and trusting. Their affection was genuine, a direct conduit to my heart. It was in these moments that I understood the true purpose of my card, not to cause discord, but to preserve these pure connections. The physical act of sending the card had been a ritual, a silent declaration of my continued presence in their lives, a counterpoint to the quiet forces that sought to diminish me. The air around me felt lighter, less suffocating. I no longer walked on eggshells, no longer anticipated rejection around every corner. I found a small, sunlit apartment in a charming neighborhood of Geneva, Illinois, just a short drive from Liam and Clara's school. It was smaller than my house in Wheaton, but it felt entirely my own. There was a bay window where I could sit and read, a compact kitchen where I could make simple, nourishing meals, and a small, quiet bedroom. The move was not an escape, but a deliberate act of self-care. It was a shedding of the lingering shadows of past grievances, a tangible declaration of my new beginning. I sold the Wheaton house, the one filled with memories, both good and painful. It was a liberation, a release from the weight of expectations, and the ghostly presence of a family dynamic that no longer served me. The new apartment felt clean, fresh, and unburdened. One afternoon, a few months after I had settled into my new place, I received an unexpected package. It was a small, crudely drawn picture from Liam, depicting me, him, and Clara holding hands, surrounded by bright, oversized flowers. Tucked inside was a short, handwritten note from Robert. "Mom, the kids really miss you. They asked for you to come to their spring concert next month. Sarah and I would like you to be there." There was no apology, no grand gesture, just a quiet invitation, a small acknowledgement. It was not the reconciliation I had once desperately craved, but it was an offering, a recognition that my presence, even when asserted quietly, held undeniable weight. The card had not just been a statement, it had been a door, and they were finally tentatively opening it. I placed Liam's drawing on my refrigerator, a vibrant splash of color in my new peaceful space. The quiet courage had paid off. I was no longer cropped out. I was simply, fully present.